Hello there, good morning. It's 10 o'clock and welcome back to another edition of Front Page with me, Noah Keate. This is a space where every Monday morning I reflect on the events and themes of the previous 7 days, as well as looking to the future to see what could happen in these extraordinary times in which we're currently going through. I'll also have a look through all the morning front pages, all the tabloids and broadsheets to see how they're analysing and reflecting on the events and looking at what they leave out of their headlines as well as what they try to include. And there are no prize for guessing what dominates all of the headlines this morning. As well as this, if you want a bit of escapism from the news, I know certainly I've experienced this morning, loads and loads of news from the moment I woke up to just before coming on air. If you want a bit of escapism, I've got quite a few cultural recommendations you enjoy. The book I think you should read this week, a podcast I think you should listen to, because I know I've been listening to a lot of podcasts recently and it's really caused a lot of space on my phone, so I need to take some time to listen to them, reduce the space because of all the download space they take up. And someone who I believe you should follow on Twitter. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know I tweet a lot, so it's someone who I've enjoyed seeing on my timeline and who I believe you should see as well. Now, if there's one thing I know from doing a politics degree, obviously term 3 is sadly cancelled this term, apart from online essays and alternative ways of learning. But if there's one thing I've learned from my time at Warwick so far, is that there's plenty of room for debate and disagreement. We all like to have an argument on the key political and social themes of our times, and I'd love to see that reflected in this show. So whether you're watching on the Raw News Facebook page or the Raw News YouTube channel, do get involved, do leave your comments, I'll be able to see them all. Whatever information you've got, whether you agree with what I'm saying, whether you completely disagree, or if you're slightly just indifferent to the show, I'd love to hear your views and opinions. So get involved, have your say, I'll read it out, offer my reply, and then we could maybe have a sort of virtual conversation in the brilliance of the internet that's allowing many sort of shows on the BBC and across the media, and of course on Raw to carry on, despite the fact we can't be there in Warwick producing shows from the studio, which is a great shame. I think we've shown how brilliant we all are as a community and as a country and as a world by adapting so well to moving online. So there is so much to talk about today. It's sort of slightly tricky to know where to begin. It's 2 minutes past 10 and I want to begin my talk today by talking about the importance of government messaging. In case you weren't aware, last night the Prime Minister gave a statement reflecting on the next stages of how the UK will gently ease its way out of the coronavirus pandemic, and there was lots and lots of coverage building up to it. I think it's important to look at how governments behave. We elect governments in the UK every 5 years. So, of course, over the last couple of years, there have been elections more frequently than 5 years, and we elect them on the basis of a manifesto. They write out a document, a big published document, which has their manifesto promises, all the different policies they want to cover. And I don't know how many people actually read the manifesto. I followed the 2017 and 2019 elections quite closely, and I tell you, I never read the manifesto any of the major parties. I doubt even if many of the candidates did either. I'm sure they mainly looked on the headline announcements, which we all rely on the media from. But we elect them on those based of that manifesto, but also to deal with events as they happen. Throughout any 5-year parliament, even a 2-year parliament, there'll be issues that the government has to deal with that they can never forecast within their manifesto. There are things that just happen, like, for example, the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, even though the Cabinet Office said the pandemic was one of the key threats facing the UK, it certainly didn't receive any attention in the 2017 or 2019 election. It just wasn't there as an issue, while the NHS was in general health policy. That's always been the case, but a pandemic specifically wasn't there. And so it's been really crucial. We trust within the government that we elect their ability to react to crises, any pandemics, any international events that take place, respond appropriately, and then we make the judgment on them at the next election. It's been fascinating to see how the UK government responded to this pandemic over the last few months, especially in terms of their messaging and response. Because I think at first their messaging was quite unclear. As I've spoken about before in the first episode of Front Page, which can you believe was 2 weeks ago, and I'm still here, haven't been taken off there just yet. I spoke about how it seemed like something far away, something happening elsewhere in China and across Italy and Iran. It wasn't seen as an issue that was really affecting the UK in the same way. So I think that means the UK was slightly slower in its response, especially as we saw it come to affect Europe and we didn't use that time appropriately. I think the government's initial message was very much based on not having a message. It was far more based around nudge theory, the idea that you nudge people into following actions, you encourage them to socially distance and spend time apart from one another rather than actually enforce anything. It was only when it was clear that wasn't going to work, and that version of herd immunity, which is the idea that lots of people catch the virus and that eventually leads to some form of immunity. It was a belief that that version of herd immunity would lead to the NHS being completely overwhelmed and far more deaths taking place than would normally take place in any given year. So it's from then on, I think the government's messaging did actually become quite clear. It was when, just after a week after I got back from university for Easter, Boris Johnson giving that real major TV announcement saying that you had to stay home apart from X, Y, and Z, only a few reasons why you could go outside, you had to protect the NHS and you had to save lives. And obviously we heard that mantra being repeated constantly at press conferences, which after a while did begin to get a little irritating. But I thought the question whether you supported the lockdown wholly, whether you completely opposed it on grounds of personal freedom and the disruption it would inevitably and is inevitably doing to the economy, whether you supported it, opposed it, or like me, accepted the lockdown but still felt slightly uncomfortable about the state having that level of power. Whatever your view, you couldn't deny that the messaging was clear. It was clear that the government were now reflecting what many other European countries were doing, apart from Sweden, of course, which, though they've had social distancing, Though they've had social distancing, it's been far based around individuals choosing to socially distance from one another rather than the state enforcing it. So it's clear then that the UK government were following that action. And that's sort of continued for the last 5 or 6 weeks, very much the time I've been spending at home. I was thinking I'd use it to go into town to the central library to do some revision for my first year exams. Well, that's completely changed. That central town centre in which the library is located has been completely shut off. There's no access there at all. That time I was expecting to spend outside catching up with friends has had to be inside instead. And it's been because of that clear message that we've seen such decreases in public transport usage. When I've been going for my daily bit of exercise, my attempt to do some jogging, I've always noticed it being very quiet. But over the last couple of weeks, I have noticed a change, both in the government messaging and in terms of what I've noticed outside. Now, of course, part of this is purely anecdotal, and that's only so scientific, my anecdotal explanation, but it's also been the base of what I've been reading elsewhere. It's both felt busier outside. It's felt like there have been more cars, more people out and about. And it's perfectly possible that they could be abiding by the rules. Those cars could be people who are key workers. They simply have to go to work. That's their form of transport. They're avoiding public transport. And the people out and about, similarly, that could be their commute to work. They could be walking, they could be doing their exercise, but it just seems slightly busier. There was a suggestion that the reason it's got slightly busier is that people may have taken time off work for the 2 weeks where primary and secondary schools and sixth form colleges were on their school holidays. So they'd taken time off work then, it felt quieter, and it's since got busier. But it definitely seems like there are more people out and around. And I think that can either be due to fatigue, though I'm not much of it is due to fatigue, because according to opinion polls, the lockdown is one of the most popular policies ever. People are willing to support staying inside and being placed under virtual house arrest. So I don't know how much of it you can put down to fatigue, but I think some of it could be put down to the general government messaging, which I'm afraid, in my opinion, has become a lot less clear. There has been more confusion about their guidance. And I think it was due to the fact that these lockdown measures that we're under, they have to be reviewed and looked at every 3 weeks. And we got to the 3-week point and it was decided that there would be no change. And we were getting towards the next 3-week point in which they would have to be examined. And so there was this big build-up to something that would be a monumental event, the first signs of how the UK would exit lockdown. And I believe, obviously do correct me if I'm wrong, that Boris Johnson was meant to give a speech last Thursday, but that was delayed to yesterday, to Sunday evening. And so because of that delay, there became a sort of vacuum of government messaging. There wasn't as much clarity on what people should be doing apart from this daily press conference advice to stay home. And it's like, well, newspapers, TV bulletins, radio bulletins, they have pages to fill, they have reports that need to be made, and so they've got to fill time. And so that lack of coherent government messaging has almost led to speculation, really. It's led to, I saw lots of tabloid and mid-market front pages last week saying that it would be Magic Monday and a road to freedom, and that's because the government messaging over what would happen simply wasn't there. We were waiting until Sunday evening to find out what was happening. Now, I don't simply believe, obviously, that the media, got my tea, different mug today. Anyway, notice I'm in a different location today, actually. Trying out a few places to broadcast from, which is always a lot of fun. Now, what was I saying? I don't think the media should simply report what the government doing. They shouldn't just say, they're not like a government handbook. They're not like the letters that we received through the door, either during the EU referendum campaign about why the government recommended remaining within the EU, or the letter that Boris Johnson sent, which I think was a complete waste of money, saying why we have to stay at home. That's not their job, but they do need to report what the government was saying and also scrutinise it, look at it, get different experts and scientific opinions on, because as I said last week, there is no one scientific view. The science is just a completely inaccurate, simplified statement. But in order to speculate, analyse and scrutinise what the government is saying, they need to have that message in the first place. If they can't scrutinise what the government has said, they'll simply resort to speculating and thinking about what the government will say. And I think that was partially shaped by the government delaying Boris Johnson's speech to Sunday evening from a Thursday. Now, he may have said this is to take more time to look at the evidence and look at the science. And I think this has been part of the broader government narrative to try and distract some of their personal responsibility by putting it onto scientific opinion and scientists, when that absolutely shouldn't be and isn't the case. Science can tell you what is happening with the virus and what their models predict, but they can't inform a policy and social and political response over what should happen. So I think that is a real shame, and really irritating that they've not been more appropriately scrutinised on how they're almost using the excuse of the science to distract from their own failings. And so, as I say, people will have seen reports in the media. I'm not saying that people are simply shaped by what they read in the papers. I think that's, again, far too simple an explanation, and forgets lots of intricate themes that affect and moments that affect the way people live. But I think the real lack of communication has both meant that people have not been less aware of government messaging and less aware of the scrutiny that comes with the government messaging. And I think it's pleasing that from last night we do have some clarity. I think when you actually look at the speech, very little actually changed. I know Enoch, our brilliant head of news, who will host Insight, our flagship political show at 3, he'll probably talk about it more with his guests then. But from my perspective, very little is actually different. It simply says the most uncontroversial bit to me is that you can go out to exercise multiple times a day. That's even being enacted by the Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish governments. On that front, there seems to be very little difference. And then on an English approach, it means you can sunbathe, sit in the park. So in terms of actually going out, there's very little difference. But with that comes great confusion. There was a sense initially, I didn't realise that until this morning, that you could meet with one person 2 meters away in a park, which is brilliant for people that have got partners and live separately to their respective partners. So I think that's really wonderful for them. But then, and maybe this is because I spend too much time on Twitter, and that's why I do a Twitter review Twitter recommendation every week, because I spend all my time there. There was a sense that you could actually meet with more than one person. Could you meet with your parents? Are you allowed to meet with your parents indoors or outdoors? Now, I'm asking these questions because I don't know the answers, and I don't want to give out inaccurate information. I hope you get obviously the Raw News Facebook page and YouTube channel are fantastic and flagship pages, but I hope you also get news from other sources as well, and I don't want to give out information that isn't correct. So I'm asking these questions really to reflect my own confusion as someone that tries to follow the news quite closely, and I try to sort of look at it. And there's been a real sense about trying to give the government the benefit of the doubt, that who could have known about this pandemic? Obviously, a pandemic was a threat, but any government could only do so much, and was inevitably expected to make mistakes. But there are only so many times that you can offer the benefit of the doubt. This speech is also slightly confusing in relation to schools. They're going to prioritise schools opening after what would have been the May half term, so the week beginning June the 1st. To reception children, year 1 children, year 6s, and then for secondary schools, year 10s and 12s, because those obviously have got GCSEs and A-levels respectively in 2021. Now, the thing I want to know about that is, it's something, obviously you're going to have many people at school who can't go in. They might be teachers who are in vulnerable groups. They're deciding to shield they're over 70 for whatever reason. They simply can't get into school. Maybe they have children in years 2 to 5, their own children. That means that they can't leave them or get adequate childcare. But my question surrounding that specifically is, are there rules, the ratio between the number of adults, the number of teachers, teaching assistants, and the number of children? Because you might have that, say, in a primary school, particularly with younger groups, and that will surely affect whether a school can open, whether younger children can go in, and who can receive the help there. So I think there generally does need to be a whole lot more clarity from the government about what you can and what you can't do. We hear that workers are expected to go back. Is it today? Is it Wednesday? It says workers who were unable to work from home. Well, many shops are not opening again for the foreseeable future, apart from garden centres, of course, which I'm very happy about. You've also got construction workers going back in, which would be brilliant at Warwick, because we've got the Warwick Arts Centre being redeveloped completely, and hopefully that'll be finished by the end of 2020. I think that'll look amazing when it's done. So it's great if they can go back in. But it raises real questions about sort of social distancing at work and what that sort of future work holds, especially if many people decide to work from home for the foreseeable future. And there are clearly regulations that are in place about having to ensure employees are safe at work. And I think employers especially almost need to be told by government, these are the regulations you have to put in to try and make your workers as safe as possible. I think there really needs to be a key balance between personal responsibility and the personal risk someone is going to take, as well as regulations that are put in by government, because, you know, a place of employment cannot be foolproof. There's always a risk that something could go wrong wherever you work. Even if you work from home, there's a risk that could happen, as well as the risk that each of us take every time we step out of our front door. But at the same time, employers should be doing what they can to make their places appropriate working environments for their employees, because obviously if someone gets ill, they can't work, and then the prospects of the company are likely to go down. So the employers both have a sort of self-interested economic risk, as well as a what's morally right for them to do and what's there in law that they have to do. So there are lots of different factors at play. And I suppose the cynical part of me thinks there does seem to be a slight focus from yesterday's address towards putting more emphasis on individual responsibility and individuals having a look at their risk. Now, I've not got anything wrong with that in the long term. I think in the long term, people will have to decide what they're willing to do rather than a government-centred approach. That does make me think, if there is a second peak, if there is a rise in cases in late May, early June, will the government just try to distract from their failings and their inability to prevent that from happening by simply blaming it on the people? Now, that could be me, but just I was cynical about Donald Trump last week. That could be me being cynical again, but I can't help but thinking whether that is the future government direction, that indirectly they're trying to move towards an onus of putting more responsibility on the people, so that anything goes wrong, it is the public and not the government who are to blame. But hey, you might completely agree with me, you might completely disagree with me. Whatever your view, I'd love to hear it from you. Do get involved by commenting on the Raw News Facebook page or YouTube channel where you're watching it. All your comments will come up on screen. I'd love to read through them. You might have some answers to the questions that I've been asking. I'd love to hear if it meant informing people who are also watching on different views and different opinions, and that would be even better. Morning, says Alex Elborough, long-term friend of the show. It's brilliant to have you here, Alex. And the CMP movies says the speech should have been given in Parliament. By the way, the CMP movies, I don't know if I know you from elsewhere, but it'd be lovely to find out your real name and who you really are. Don't worry if you don't want to, but it's lovely to see you commenting along every week and watching, so thank you so much. I do agree that the speech probably should have been given in Parliament. I don't know why they couldn't have given it on Thursday or Friday to MPs, or even held a special Saturday sitting with social distancing in the chamber and many MPs zooming in to ask questions. I do think that probably would have been better than a TV address to the public. They're probably more a place of sort of, I mean, obviously I'm not calling Boris Johnson a dictator by any stretch of the imagination, don't get that out there, but often dictators do use addresses to the public as a way of informing people. And I think that sense of giving it in Parliament where there is accountability and encouraging people to tune into Parliament would have been better. In Boris Johnson's defence, he will be getting parliamentary questions today from 3:30, I believe, 3:30, 4 o'clock. He'll be making a statement, and then Keir Starmer and other MPs will be able to respond and probe him. So I think that's very positive. Alex Elborough says that the Sunday address was pre-recorded too. Not sure when it was done. Yes, I think it was done. It may have been done earlier that Sunday. But what I am aware of, I get a lot of my news from Twitter, as I said about 10 times before, but it's true. I am aware of that the cabinet weren't overly consulted on the direction of Boris Johnson's speech and the specific details he was looking at. It seemed to have been a more centralised approach, a sort of more sofa government approach that Tony Blair took, where it was advisors like Alistair Campbell that were consulted over the cabinet as a whole. Now, I'm a bit of a traditionalist on this. I'm a firm believer in cabinet government where every single Secretary of State is consulted and able to have their view on the opinion, and that's the place for debates, really. The cabinet is where you get a whole host of people representing the different wings of the political party and the government being able to express their ideas and have debates in private that aren't leaked to the media. You have your debate, have your disagreement, and then you come to a shared view. And then if a minister can't support that shared view, then they have to resign. So I do really oppose this sort of centralisation of government decision-making within Whitehall. That means that there isn't sort of fairness and, that people aren't allowed to have their say and have their opinions. Paul Bass also comments, hello Paul, saying, no, this is fantastic, keep safe. Oh, thank you for your support. Yes, I am mainly keeping safe. I'm only really going outside to go for my jogging, really, which is, fine for me because there's plenty to do at home, but I do miss being able to go into town, listen to a podcast and go book shopping. But let's get our first look at the Monday morning front pages, and they're all sort of dominated. The BBC papers blog says newspaper headlines, chaos or freedom, lockdown roadmap divides the papers. Well, I think lots of the papers are very much framing it around their own political allegiance. So the Daily Mail this morning says PM's first steps to free Britain. Boris keeps the handbrake on, and it's very much sort of treating it like a car journey, but I'm not sure what analogy they're using there. And then they give bullet points of the main issues. So going to work, you can't do your job from home. Well, as I say, what does that mean for shop workers, apart from those that work in supermarkets or garden centres? Obviously, their firms aren't going to be reopening and they can't do their work from home. Also interested to know what it means for the furlough scheme, because obviously if you are working, that breaks the furlough rules and means you'll have to be employed by your employer rather than the government. And that's one of the things I really worry about, that you'll have a vulnerable person that might be ill and might have underlying health issues, but their employer simply says, we put in every safety measure possible, you have to come in or you'll be made redundant. So people will have to choose between their health and their wages. Now, of course, in the long-term future, of course, people go in, people take that risk and they assess that. But actually, while the pandemic is still going on and we're not, we're not sort of level one, as the Prime Minister called it, where there's no threat at all. I think it's really important that employers are willing to be flexible, and that might mean relying on the government more. Exercise more than once a day and sunbathe. Well, I'm not a massive fan of sunbathing holidays, so I'm not sure I'll be doing sunbathing, but I might try and do maybe some more jogging, go beyond my 2 kilometres that I try and do every day. Primary schools apparently, yes, could reopen in June. Reception year 1 and year 6. I'm not sure whether the main reason for getting year 6s in is because they'll be adjusting to that transition of going to secondary school, but that's not going to be helpful if there are no secondary school transition days. I know I enjoyed mine, what was it, nearly 8 years ago, can you believe? 8 years ago I had my secondary school transition days, but they're not going to be happening surely. If secondary schools have only got year 10 and year 12s, they'll surely want the minimal amount of staff in. But full lockdown will return if virus surges. Well, I do really fear a second peak that we're beginning to see slightly in Germany and South Korea, countries that were deemed to have dealt as well as you possibly could with the virus. And if Germany have eased their lockdown, we have seen an increase in the number of daily cases, sadly, which I think is a real shame, as well as South Korea, which again they seem to have dealt with it quite well, but have had to maybe not impose stricter lockdown measures, but they've seen more cases. The Times today, they have at the top of their paper, lose weight safely, the diet versus exercise debate. Well, just from that, I can say, well, it's both. You have to diet well and you have to exercise. It's a combination of the two. I try and exercise well, but I did have half a packet of hobnobs this morning, so I think that tells you all you need to know about my fitness regime or lack thereof. The Prime Minister sets out lockdown exit plan. They've got a picture of the Prime Minister almost thumping the desk, saying that it's time to restart the economy with a 3-month roadmap to open schools and shops. Well, as I spoke about before, the economy is not this abstract bubble in the air or just money. It's about the actions and choices of individuals. And shops could begin to reopen, but if people don't go to those shops, you could both have economic, that would damage the economy because they'd be forced to shut. They'd have to pay the cost of keeping open, electricity costs. But if they make no sales, they'll be forced to shut, and we'll probably end up in even more of a recession and maybe even economic depression than we're already in. And then the Times also on their front page, Quentin Letts, a brilliant political sketch writer who used to write for the Daily Mail, saying just a hint of release from the national imprisonment. Well, it is basically virtual house arrest. And as I say, while I accept it, I do accept the lockdown. That doesn't mean I support it, and it doesn't mean I like the amount of powers that we're handing over to the state quite willingly, actually. And that means those that, I don't think that there should be any sort of censorship for those that do oppose the lockdown. I think their voices should be allowed to be heard, and we should be able to debate with them on the merits or otherwise of the lockdown we're in. The Daily Telegraph, The Long Road to Freedom. I'm sure there's a book like that was Nelson Mandela's autobiography, or maybe that was Long Walk to Freedom, but sort of playing on those words and the different steps that we're taking to sort of, get back out of into some form of normal society. As I've said before, I don't think full normality will ever be restored. Step 3, they're talking about we might have open air cafes, cinemas, and churches could also reopen in July. Real issue for people that do go to churches in any sort of religious place. Probably, I'm making a vague generalisation here, probably more likely to be older and maybe not have access to the internet. So it's going to be really tricky for those that are relying on sort of virtual church services, virtual religious services to get their sort of holy part of the week every single Sunday. And interestingly, on the Daily Telegraph front page, normally a friend of the Prime Minister saying he gave us the map, but with only a few vague directions as their key comment piece, which is right, actually. I thought nothing much had changed. And certainly things that I've seen on Twitter, people that I've spoken to afterwards were generally not really impressed with the lack of clarity, especially over wage security and that real almost class disparity, the reintroduction of class politics with more middle class people who work in offices able to continue working from home, whereas say more construction people who are more based in the construction industry who might be deemed more working class having to go in. As I say, these are generalisations, but it's just true. The last front page now, The Sun. PM maps out on lockdown, ready, steady, slow, of the ready, steady, go, of course, for races and running and things, which I never did particularly well in, saying a 3-step plan to ease restrictions, only go back to work if it's safe, and it's madness to risk a second spike. I think the debates over sort of safety, risk and personal choice are really going to be at the forefront of the debate, if not now, certainly later this year, and the extent to which, who decides what is safe? Is it the government, is it employers, or is it individuals? And how do we manage a world that can never be fully safe? It can never be fully free of risk, and that's not always a bad thing. But at the same time, we have got the highest number of deaths within Europe. We may not have the highest death per head of the population, but certainly on raw numbers in Europe and the current statistics, the UK has certainly got the highest. Oh, look, lots of brilliant excellent comments coming through. The CMP movies saying you'll be able to be out. Oh yes, I may have already read this comment. We may be able to be outside for unlimited jogging. Can't wait. Alex Elbow says they talk about R going down, but how can this be at all reliable with inconsistent testing, tracking, and tracing? Not sure what they're basing this on, apart from theoretical modelling. Well, a lot of it is based on modelling, and I was surprised that the Prime Minister didn't talk more about this tracking and testing and tracing app that's happening on the Isle of Wight. They're urging people who are there to download the app for themselves, and somehow that would mean that other people would be able to trace your movements and sort of medical history in relation to whether you've had the coronavirus or not. And I'm quite worried about that from a sort of privacy perspective and a civil liberty perspective, both because of the lack of clarity, both from the government and from the media, and in terms of, do I want other people knowing my location? No, I don't. And do I want other people knowing my medical records? No, I don't. Especially as I read somewhere that these medical records, medical bits of evidence that could be gained from the app could be kept and used as research in the future. Well, I certainly didn't give my consent for any prospective testing and tracing to be used, and I don't think the British people did either. I know that it's been used in other European countries, but I think we should be as sceptical as that as we are of the lockdown and understanding the merits and costs that has. And the CMP movie says we can't escape the second peak, only ameliorate it. May have mispronounced that, so I do apologise. Well, I hope we can escape some kind of second peak. I remember in the initial modelling in January and February, it showed that this was a risk. You'd have a small number of rise of cases early on, then later on it would massively increase. So I really hope we can do as much as we can to escape it, because I think it would be so worrying, given the number of deaths and excess deaths we've already had, for that to go even further. Can you believe we're already almost halfway through the show already? It is 10:28, and I want to bring some sort of optimism and positivity into discussion now as we enter the half an hour stage of the program, looking more at the selfless attitudes of the community and the sense of people really coming together as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. It's not like war. I hate it when people make the comparisons to it being like the Second World War, like the First World War. I don't think they're appropriate. I don't think they're accurate, and I don't think they actually help move the situation forward. But there is some form of togetherness and community that has become present that I think for some people might not have been present since the war when we were all united against that common enemy. And I think that has been really touching to see. Obviously, initially, the coronavirus pandemic did bring out the worst of people in the UK, people doing excess shopping, buying far more than they needed to because they were simply paranoid about being forced indoors for weeks on end, even though within the lockdown restrictions you're perfectly within your right to go shopping for essential food, and whether it's toilet roll, paracetamol, all those cliche products everyone was buying. So it obviously brings out the worst in people, but at the same time I think it can bring out the best in people as well, and we have seen that. It's certainly in my local area, we've seen sort of local community organisations set up that deliver prescriptions to people, for older people that might be shielding and not want to go outside at all. People have been able to coordinate with the local Boots pharmacy and other pharmacies to get the correct information and then deliver the prescription safely to the person's door. And I think that's really wonderful to see, because there's going to be no economic gain for the people that do that. They're simply giving up their time for free to ensure that others can get the right prescriptions and right medicines that they always need. Because the health issues don't go away during a pandemic, we still have people that have got cancer issues, stroke issues, any other forms of issues and treatments that need attention and medicine. So I think it's actually really lovely and really heartwarming to see that people have been willing to do that and sort of take time to be with one another. We've also seen that more generally with the NHS volunteer scheme. I think you had well over 700,000 people signing up for it. It might have been nearer to 1 million. You're signing up to phone others up, as I say, to deliver things, to be a responder for anyone that might be having health issues within public, and being there just to be on the frontline response before paramedics and other paid medical staff arrived. I think that has been really heartwarming to see, and showing that people have come together. I know it's often misquoted, Margaret Thatcher's quote about there being no such thing as society, only individuals and their families. But I think this pandemic has shown that there are more than just people and their families. I think that view of the world is quite a demoralising view, to suggest that we're all separated into our own house on the streets. We don't communicate with others, and certainly where I live it is trickier to do that simply because of where we're located. But I think it has been really warming and really touching to see that sense of people coming together both in unity against the shared opposition towards the virus, and a shared sense of togetherness of what life can be during the pandemic and life like after the pandemic. And you've had businesses trying to make things freely available, people trying to sort of do what they can for other people, talking to people, taking time for other people. I'm sure that many people will have used this pandemic as an opportunity to get in touch with people online, phone people up, email people that they might not have spoken to for some time. And as I say, I think that's really lovely to see, really brilliant to see, and it does make me think that for all the problems in the world, for all that's wrong in the world, for all the evil that there is in the world, certainly on a local level, people have been willing to communicate with each other. I think that should be really touching. Now, it's 10:32 already, can you believe? And I want to do my book review for today. And so the book I've chosen, because as you know, it's a regular feature, the books are always out of shot until I get them on. It's called Education. It's by Tara Westover, and it charts the story of a woman who goes from living on a mountain in rural Idaho to going to university, where she gets her bachelor's degree, and then getting a master's degree and a PhD from Cambridge University. Now, you might think these are impressive achievements, but a lot of people do them. So why is this worthy of a book? Well, my friends, the reason it's worthy of a book is because she was born into a Mormon survivalist family, and this basically meant that her life was completely upside down. As I say, she lived in rural Idaho on a mountain on her family farm, and her family basically didn't believe in or trust any aspect of federal government. Look at me going all American. Whether it was the healthcare system, schools, hospitals, anything related to structure and system within society, the established view for living behaving. The family simply didn't trust that, so that meant she never went to school. She didn't have a birth certificate until she was 9 years old. She didn't really get ingrained or integrated within her community, which I'm sure was hard enough when you're living in rural Idaho. And this charts her journey through almost accepting that at first, towards wanting to go and have a proper education and go out of the world, go out of her specific location within Idaho, and the inevitable conflict that presents. So there are lots of very sort of shocking and amusing anecdotes in equal measure that chart her life on this mountain. You know, if she got injuries, they wouldn't go to hospital, but they would use herbal methods for trying to cure whatever was wrong. Her father very much believed in the year 2000 being a big sort of age where the world would end. I know there was that real conspiracy theory going around that it would become 2000 and then everything would end, the world would completely change. He also believed that the fall of the Twin Towers would lead to some kind of religious war and that would cause the world to end as well. So this Mormon survivalist approach, and she makes it very clear at the start of the book, she's not looking at Mormonism generally, and it's neither a positive nor negative interpretation. It's simply her experience, her family experience, and how that affected the way she wanted to live. And it charts lots of big questions. You know, I'm as much a big coming of age cliche films as the next person, but this is a coming of age, but it's more than just that. It's not cliche. It is a sort of truly unique, profound experience. So she goes to her university, I think Brigham Young University in Idaho, and she puts her hand up and says, "What's the Holocaust?" Now, she is not an anti-Semite whatsoever, but she simply doesn't know what it is. She has never taught about it. She'd never heard of the words and wanting to learn more. She does the logical thing of putting her hand up to ask, but of course that means her time there is very tricky. She's shunned because people believe that she is some kind of denier. And then that manages, she does well enough there to go to Cambridge and do a master's degree, and then to do a PhD, which I think she managed to gain in 2014. So it's a huge, huge achievement, given the background from which where she came. And she's often charts how at the farm, her brother, who also went to get an education, would have to bring home textbooks, and she sort of learned those in secret algebra, because that meant she'd be able to go to university and take that national test. Meant she could go and try and get an undergraduate degree. But it's not something that has a happy ending. She does get her PhD, as I say, and there are points there where you wonder whether she will get it, but there is no happy ending. She was, I'm afraid, regularly abused by one of her brothers. She had a very big family. You mentioned that meant that her experience was really hard and that her time in submitting the PhD thesis was severely delayed. I think her supervisor, David Runciman, said, you know, if you can't do the PhD, don't worry, but Tara was simply unable to convey why she was so delayed in sending work over. And it's not a happy ending. He does torment her, but sadly her parents don't believe Tara when she says, "I'm being tormented by my brother in that way." And so it means that she's forced almost to leave them behind in Idaho and become estranged from them. And I don't think she speaks to them anymore. The publication of the book certainly won't have helped, but it's very honest and very raw portrayal of how the conflict between what someone wants to do for their family and how that can differ to what someone wants to do for themselves and towards society. Because obviously, if she stayed and lived with her family, her life in the future would be very simple. She would have got a patch of land on the farm, got married and had children, and would have stayed on that mountain in rural Idaho, and we'd have probably never heard of her. But that wasn't the life she wanted to lead. She wanted to be educated. And she makes a very good distinction between how being educated in the classroom is very different to education as a whole. It's different from schools where education is institutionalized and there's one method for learning about the world. She makes the case for education being more than that, and that it should be a constant process of redeveloping and rediscovering yourself rather than simply being told the facts, important though the facts are. And she certainly grasped that if she got a PhD. But as I say, really inspiring book, just under 400 pages, so it's not terribly long. It's quite a quick read. I think I read it in a few days, but I got a lot out of it. I found it very moving. It's very well written, and as the great Stephen Fry says, there's no feeling like discovering a young writer who's springing up fully armed with so much talent. So I think it's really worth your time. I wouldn't be surprised if it's made into a film. It should be made into a film, and it would be a coming of age film, which, as I say, that's my sort of film to watch, far more than the superhero films. I might do it for other people, but not necessarily for me. So that is a book I really would strongly recommend you get your hands on and devote your time to. So Educated by Tara Westover left me feeling very educated down there. And as the MP movie says, very raw, you might say, boom, boom, you beat me to it. I'm the one that makes the puns, but very good. The CMP movie is very, very, very proud. And I think now would be the best time to take some look at more of the newspaper headlines. The Daily Express today, they're still backing NHS and care workers, care heroes rather, which is lovely to see. And they're still offering free home delivery, which is great. You read the Daily Express. It always has to have a weather story. So sunny May is put on ice by Arctic plunge. So got a picture of snow there, which certainly looking out my back window this afternoon, I can't see. Boris Johnson, our route to freedom in baby steps. And I think that could maybe link to the fact he's just had his fifth or sixth child, Wilfred, very recently. He reveals cautious three-stage lockdown exit plan, saying exercise all you like, and there's a green light for driving distances. Yes, so you can drive a considerable distance to exercise. I suppose people that were shamed by the police, quite shameful, the actions of the police actually for going to the Peak District to exercise, where you had a drone looking at them, which I thought was far too authoritarian. That's now fine, because as I say, probably extremely easy to socially distance in a national park. The Metro this morning, they start with Zoom, just one look, and then my heart went boom. Why? It's now actually easier to find love. So that's brilliant. And then they're saying it's all Greek to us, Boris, and they're looking at how Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, who is actually called Alexander Johnson, lots of people I spoke to didn't know that, but his real name is actually Alexander. It's some confusion because he often likes to recite Greek phrases. The Stay Alert replaces the Stay Home slogan. Yes, I managed to get to 39 minutes into the show without mentioning Stay Alert, which has become one of the gripes, one of the things that really irritates me. Firstly, I think it's quite patronising. I think people have been extremely alert to the dangers facing them over the last weeks. I think that's why in the UK especially there's been such conformity responding to the virus and staying within our doors. We've not been going out very much. It has been quiet. People have been behaving themselves. So A, I think it's patronising. B, I think it's, well, how can we be alert all the time? Sometimes we're asleep. We need to be asleep to recharge our batteries, become aware of risks in the future and allow our brains to work. So you can't be very alert there. And see, how on earth can you be alert to something that's so minuscule and so small? Now, you might sound being pedantic and pretentious, but it is the case that stay alert is a far more vague and ambiguous phrase than the stay home guidelines, which the Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon is promoting. And also, I think one of the phrases they have got rid of is the protect the NHS guideline, because the NHS, I think in some cases is a bit like a national religion, and it's as though people are following that message so strongly they were really not going to see their GPs or see their doctors at all if they had any non-COVID health issues. Almost the NHS has been protected so well it's not overwhelmed yet at all. Obviously it could be in the future, and that's meant potentially other non-COVID issues that need action, like cancers, like strokes, and not receive the attention they need. Now, as I've said before, I'm no scientist, but for those conditions, it's very much defeating them and tackling them is very much based around early detection. So if you're unable to get that early detection, the chances of survival really go down. So I think the important message is, if you think you've got symptoms of a cancer, of a stroke, or another health issue, ring up your GP as soon as possible, because that still deserves attention. The coronavirus deserves it. People with coronavirus deserve much attention, but people with other non-COVID issues also deserve help as well. The Guardian, taking an IPM's lockdown release, leaves Britain confused and divided. Now, as you'd expect from The Guardian, very much a liberal publication, so they're hardly going to be the government's biggest friend. But I think they're reflective. I mean, as I say, people I follow on Twitter are not reflective of the whole country. Maybe people do think that it's very much based around common sense and that they understand the new guidelines that were recorded last night, released. They understand what people want to do. I do feel quite ambiguous, and I think the morning broadcast this morning on the Today programme and other shows from Dominic Raab, the Foreign Secretary, haven't left me with more clarity than I had last night. But as I say, you might completely disagree with that. You might completely know what you're meant to do, where we're going. So if that is the case, then do comment down below on the Facebook page or YouTube channel. I'd love to hear your views and opinions about how you think what the best response is for dealing with the pandemic. The Mirror this morning, a pull-out, brilliant ways to brighten your garden this summer, your summer garden, what and where to plant. So, well, it's good timing, especially as garden centres reopen this week. People will be wanting to ensure that they can make the most of the sunny weather to ensure their gardens look brilliant, and also about how to make the most out of Freeview and the different bits of cultural enjoyment to watch on television. I know I've been trying to enjoy some different films at the weekend to try and distinguish the weekday and the weekend, as well as bits of television that I wanted to watch for a while, but simply haven't had the time to catch up on. And the Mirror say lockdown Britain, it's chaos. So again, the Mirror very much a friend of the Labour Party, so going to likely oppose the government and scrutinise the government. And I think that's helpful on these headlines, that they have a range of, they're reporting the same story. It's the same guidelines that all the papers will have seen, but clearly their analysis of it will be slightly nuanced and slightly different, both depending on their political view and their view of how the nation is dealing with the lockdown. And I think that's right, really, because there are different responses and there are nuances, and that the papers should be reflective of what the country thinks too. Now, I want to move on today. I'm just looking at my notes. As you know, I do have notes. That's why it's so different doing it on radio, because you can look at all your notes and you don't have to worry about it being a visual show. But I love the visual aspect of it. It's very, very different, but I'm enjoying it a lot. I want to talk about something different, say something non-coronavirus for now, before I return back to the front page of some other bits of culture. And that is about bookshelves. Now, in case you weren't aware, given that I've just promoted a book, just to let you know, it's coming up to 11:15 already, as I say, going so quickly. Now, bookshelves, another hobby of mine when I'm not on Twitter, is reading a lot. I like to try and read every night before I go to sleep, and I try and get through quite a few books each year. I'm ashamed to say I'm 3 books behind on my Goodreads reading challenge for 2020, which I'm, is disastrous, especially since I've had a bit more time in lockdown to be enjoying books. And I want to talk about a recent controversy that sort of erupted on Twitter. Sarah Vine, the Daily Mail journalist and wife of Michael Gove, who's the Cabinet Office Minister, posted a photo of their bookshelf, one bookshelf, theirs and many, and it contained a book by the awful man, Holocaust denier, David Irving. There was much condemnation and fury from this, not least from the Guardian columnist, who I like immensely, Owen Jones, who I think is a really good writer, but he seemed to be making a judgment that was incorrect, fundamentally incorrect in my view. He was almost saying that, because they had this book on their shelves, why did they have this book on their shelves? And I think it's important to make the point that it's possible and right to have books from people that you fundamentally disagree with, whether it is related to awful man, the Holocaust denier, David Irving, or anyone else. It's important that we're able to confront ideas that we profoundly disagree with and that we believe are abhorrent, because only by reading about them, only by reading about such analysis, are we able to appropriately combat it and realise its evil and how it needs to be defeated. And so I think it should be important to have a real range of books across one's bookshelf, both at home, on our bookshelves, and what we try and go and read out in libraries. I think it's always important, it should be, especially from the left, want to expand one's mind and hear a range of different ideas to know what's right and what's wrong about the world. And I think any sort of censorship, book censorship, I've written about this for The Bore, which is Warwick's award-winning student newspaper, about how books are for debates and not censorship, and that actually we should look at texts of books critically and say why we believe that they're so wrong, what's right about them and what's wrong about them. And obviously for David Irving it's wholly wrong, but that's something that deserves to be read and combated and not shunned to one side. And I think, for many people, they'll be researching books of that awful Nazi regime, but they'll do so using lots of the original texts, people that were part of that monstrosity of a government. And only by using those original texts, they pull them apart and say why they're so wrong. But more generally on bookshelves, I noticed that we've had on the television a lot of people zooming in, phoning in, appearing on news shows from their home, and behind them has very much been, I've not got this today, but behind them there has been a bookshelf on display, and there have been some brilliant Twitter pages created showing how where your bookshelves are is a reflection, or how you arrange your bookshelves is a reflection of your sort of social status. And I think that could very much be an issue, particularly around middle classes. I could very much, have some sort of dinner party, and downstairs all the sort of highbrow books, all the hardbacks, all the literary fiction hardbacks that have been longlisted for the Booker Prize, and upstairs are all the awful paperbacks that are romantic novels that wouldn't exactly go down as sort of highbrow. So it's very much a sort of social status position about where your books are within the house and what you allow guests to see. But I think it's also a reflection perhaps of the lack of class diversity in terms of who the BBC and other organisations have on their programme. I say I love books. I love lots of bookshelves. I aim when I'm older to have a house that's full of books. I want it to be like a library. But many people, unfortunately, cannot afford to spend any disposable income they have on literary reads. They might choose not to. They might not see the value of what they can get out of a book, and so their backgrounds wouldn't be filled with books and other literary reads to enjoy. And I think it's important that the media take account for that. But for many, they either want to spend it on other things, like they might prefer the cinema, might prefer buying clothes to reading. or they might simply see books as inaccessible to them. And for books, and I might be wrong in that sense, people might choose to enjoy and read lots of books, but rely on the local library being open in order to access it. So they might rely on going, get their book from the library and read their hardback there, or relying on these lovely bird boxes that we have in my local area, where you sort of take a book for free and then return a book. So it's this sort of transition system that allows books to be updated and a constant refreshment of a mini library where you get to keep a book and then return it or take another book. I think it's a really lovely idea. And for many people, that would be their only way of accessing their books. They won't want to go on Amazon, buy a book and pay more for the package and posting that's inevitably involved. So I think we both have to ensure books that we do read are from a diversity of opinions, from the brilliant to the truly awful and monstrous, but also a recognition of where your books are within your house, and an understanding that unfortunately for many people, books come fairly low down a list of priorities for them for any disposable income that they have. And I think this is going to be particularly important for children that are currently attending school when they do go back to school after the coronavirus pandemic reduces in threat, so that the UK ends up in level 1. I think it's important for people to realise and appreciate the value of books and the value of education there, and what literary reads can provide, whether it's fiction or non-fiction. Because certainly as a result of the schools closing, you'll have had many children who will have received brilliant online teaching, online tuition to enhance their knowledge and ensure that lessons can take place, and very much what goes on at school is not that different from what goes on online. But for others, that won't have been the case. You will have had some where they hardly receive any lessons, any tuition at all, and so that process of learning and enjoying new facts has become far harder, and I think we can't allow that to be the case. And so many, we want to both encourage people to read books at home during the lockdown, but also after the lockdown ends and people do return to school. I think it's important that people appreciate and enjoy literary reads and understand how books are vital for any form of education and knowledge about the world, the past, the world that we're currently living in, and the future as well. Now it's 10:50, and I think it's a good time to take another look at some more of the headlines. The Financial Times today, as ever, lots of stories on their headlines saying that Johnson lays out a 3-phase plan for putting Britain back to work, ditching a stay-at-home message, urging construction to restart, but with most restrictions remaining. And I think that's important to remember from yesterday's announcement. The big build-up to it, the speculation from the media existed, actually didn't reflect the messaging at all. Actually, most of what's happening is not really any different to what's happened over the last 7 weeks. So I think people that see this as a big difference from the previous 7 weeks, that this is the start of something really, really new, would be quite mistaken. And saying that we need a reserve force of medics to bolster the NHS, and that's potentially being considered by Number 10. I think it's always important that there are enough people, there is enough supply of medics, doctors and nurses to treat the demand for healthcare that inevitably exists. And I think it's brilliant if they can do that, but how they can do that in the most effective way, I'm not sure. And I think that again reflects the urgent need for scrutiny, both from government and by MPs, who's, after all, it's their job to hold any government account that's elected throughout a 5-year parliament. The leading with the Prime Minister sending millions back to work. Those who can't do their jobs remotely will be actively encouraged to return, with unlimited outdoor leisure time permitted, with golf courses, tennis courts allowed to reopen. And this again is a confusion about whether you can do exercise. Can you do a form of exercise with people that are in your household? Could you do it with other members of your family that you haven't seen but can socially distance with? Can you do it with friends or partners that you might be living separately from? I'm getting a real sense of no clarity about what we're allowed to do. It's saying that, again, as I said earlier, in July, some pubs, restaurants, cinemas and places of worship could open again, which I'm actually really looking forward to. I understand why they're remaining shut. The virus spreads far more quickly inside than outside. It does spread obviously outside, but not as much and not as much of an intensive way. But I am looking forward, just anecdotally, to seeing friends again who I've spoken to online, but it really isn't the same as seeing them in person. Just going to Wagamama, other restaurants of course are available, and just having a catch up in person and communicating with others, because I think, much as I enjoy being an introvert and enjoying my own company, actually the company of others is actually really appreciated, especially after a long time. Now, in our last paper, I think I've actually completed a paper review, because I think last week there was so much to talk about, and the papers there was far more of a variety of papers last week rather than this week, where they're pretty much all focused on the one press announcement yesterday. But as ever, you can trust the brilliant paper that is the Daily Star to run on something slightly different to all the other papers, saying Mr. Blobby ruins the summer. According to the Star, Britain is set to be Mr. Blobbled by a cool blob weather system that will ruin the summer. We will shiver in the coldest June to August for 5 years as the 100-mile wide Atlantic chill sets temperatures below 14.7 Celsius. And then they have a rather creepy picture of Mr. Blobby going chilly, chilly, chilly. So I think that, yeah, that sort of, I don't know whether I can really say anything more to comment on that, but it's a cool splodge shocker as our weather changes. So I think, yeah, quite extraordinary. The CMP movies, has commented saying that I think that while of course anyone can have a book, especially one you disagree with, when a politician presents themselves to the public, there are some books that can come down from the shelves. Well, in Michael Gove's defence, it was his wife, the Daily Mail journalist Sarah Vine, that posted the photo, or at least during the photo shoot. Yeah, I think I'm for all books being on shelves. I think they want to read books, and that's part of what education is all about, being taught how to critically analyse books and not just taking information at face value, which again, that sort of links to reinforcing the purpose of journalists having information from the government, but being able to analyse it and scrutinise it, and the role for commentators, people that have been around the political bloc for decades, giving their opinions on, based on what they've seen from previous governments, how they think this government will behave. Because it's important that people do have knowledge when they're going into elections. I was very sad, obviously, because last Thursday was meant to be local elections night. It's one of my highlights of the year, having an all-nighter where I sleep from about 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. and then I'm awake from 10 p.m. until 10 p.m. on the Friday night to watch the local elections results coverage. I usually really enjoy that, seeing which councils change, and understanding, of course, that while turnout for local elections is far smaller than national elections, actually how parties do in local elections can be somewhat of a reflection of the national performance. It only tells you a little bit, because obviously people will vote on local issues, but I think there's no doubt that national politics, national leaders and national parties and their policy and impact on the results of local elections. So I was deeply gutted, obviously, that all those elections were cancelled last Thursday, but that does mean that next May I can look forward to a sort of maybe doubly long elections night, as we'll have all the usual elections that take place in 2021, as well as all the 2020 local and mayoral elections that obviously were unable to happen. Now, I want to move on to my other cultural recommendations this week. It seems I always cram them into the last 5 minutes. We talk about so many other things, not least related to the coronavirus pandemic, that we have to squeeze these other occasions into 5 minutes. And maybe one day my timing will sort itself out, but I wouldn't rush to any conclusions that will happen soon. My podcast of the week is a brilliant podcast on BBC Sounds, which I know people have had problems with BBC Sounds, but I haven't actually. I found it really useful, and it's the media show podcast hosted by Anil Rajan usually on Wednesday afternoons, I believe, on Radio 4, and it's a really fantastic podcast, surprisingly, about the media. It covers print, radio, online and television journalism in a really insightful way, and it looks at the key trends and themes that are affecting the media world. And it's not simply a programme on the radio that's talking to itself. It gets key guests from the different areas, the different sectors, and it interrogates them really well. One of the things I really like about Anil Raj as a host is that he's able to get a lot of information out of the guests and without sort of interrogating them in a Jackson style. He's both really incisive and really concise in his questioning, and he almost asks what the viewer is thinking, which I think that's a real art. Anil is the, I think, media editor of the BBC, so obviously lots of expertise in that area. He used to edit the independent newspaper before it went to online only, so a real expert in that. And actually it covers such a range of topics every week. It's been going about 10 years. Lots of topics that I personally thought I might not be interested in. So during the pandemic, it did a programme about religious programmes and the role of religious broadcasters. So it looked at the Jewish news, a Christian radio station, I believe, and a Muslim television channel. And even though I'm a complete atheist, it really made me consider how those religious outlets are broadcasting and continuing their broadcasting in the lockdown. I found it absolutely deeply fascinating. And similarly, earlier this morning, I listened to a broadcast on how the rise of video games during lockdown. I read lots of brilliant games articles on the Ball website, as I say, our award-winning student newspaper. But it was really amazing to see how video games have almost done well as a result of the pandemic, because people have had more time indoors to catch up on their latest games. So even topics I wouldn't naturally think of myself as being interested in them, Anil covers them, and the guests cover them in such a way that any listener, whether they're clued up in the media or not, can really enjoy them. And there's an episode every Wednesday, even during lockdown. Lots of people phoning in from their homes, doing it remotely, but they're not stopping. And it goes back, I think, to about 2009. They've got a brilliant archive of over 600 episodes. I think I'll always be amused. That's my podcast week. Done as a live radio show, but it does continue as it is available as a podcast to download for the foreseeable future. And finally, in the last 2 minutes, my tweeter of the week is the brilliant, all-round good egg Giles Brandreth. You may not have heard of Giles. He did visit the University of Warwick a few years ago, I believe. He came to something at the Arts Centre, but he's a really brilliant individual. From a political perspective, as I look at everything politically, he was a Conservative MP for between 1992 and 1997 for the city of Chester, but he's done so many other things before and after that. He's a brilliant speaker, so articulate in the way that he expresses himself, no hesitation, no repetition, no deviation. He was known as a brilliant guest on that Radio 4 programme, Just a Minute. Really wry, really witty with everything that he does. He's always so busy. And he's well known on Twitter, especially for his brilliant poetry that he wrote a book, I think, about why learning poetry is something that's really worth your time. And he's known in the past for having a brilliant range of different jumpers that he wears. So every day during about 7:15 on Twitter, so you have to be up early to get it as it comes through. He wears a different jumper that he's had made for him. I don't know whether he's made them for himself, but they're such a brilliant range of jumpers. And he recites a poem, usually with a brilliant bookshelf, all kinds of books in the background. So he's always been an all-round good egg, but especially during lockdown. If I'm up early, which I have to say isn't always the case, it's really lovely to hear his remarks. And actually he's, I'm sure he has his ups and downs, but he always has a personality of being so alive with the world and appreciating the world, not least as in his twilight years. But I'm really, really big fan of Giles. And if I ever could be a fraction of as good a speaker as he is, then that would be a truly brilliant day. Now, can you believe it? We've already reached the end of the show. It's been such a fast, speedy hour. We've talked about so much. Thank you so much for your company and comments over the last hour. It's been brilliant to have your, company and discuss the issues that are affecting the world. Who knows what will be going on when we return a week today, Monday morning, 10 a.m. It will be a pleasure to have your company. Do make sure you stay tuned to the Rural News Facebook page and YouTube channels throughout the week, because we have such a variety of events coming up. But for now, can I just say thanks so much for watching. Goodbye, stay well, and see you next Monday morning, 10 a.m. here on Rural News. In or out of lockdown, it's the place to be.